The rain in Aethelburg never seemed to wash anything clean. It just smeared the neon glow of the corporate monoliths across the perpetually slick streets, turning the city into a watercolor painting of ambition and decay. From my penthouse office, a sterile white box, suspended 1,000 feet above the grime, I had a god's eye view of it all. I was Kaelen, a name whispered with a certain reverence in the circles that mattered. I was an architect of memory, and in a world where experience was the ultimate luxury, I was a purveyor of dreams. My clients weren't interested in the mundane. They craved the impossible, the adrenaline rush of summiting a mountain that had been strip-mined into oblivion a century ago, the tender embrace of a lover long since lost to time, the triumphant roar of a crowd in an arena that was now just a crater filled with acidic water. I sculpted these moments, weaving together sensory data with a surgeon's precision. I was a digital god, and my pantheon was the wealthy elite of Aethelburg. Today, my divine work was more terrestrial. My client was a shipping magnate, a man whose face was a roadmap of ruthless decisions. He wanted to remember a childhood he never had, a sun-drenched afternoon spent fishing with a father who had, in reality, been more interested in his stock portfolio than his son. It was a common enough request, a gilded cage of nostalgia for a life unlived. I slipped on my neural interface, a sleek silver band that hummed with latent power. The world dissolved into a sea of code, a torrent of data streams that I could mold and shape with a thought. I began to build. The scent of pine needles, the warmth of the sun on skin, the gentle lapping of water against a wooden boat. I layered them one by one, a symphony of sensation. I borrowed the laugh of a long-dead comedian, the crinkle of a grandfatherly eye from a stock image, the calloused but gentle touch of a seasoned fisherman. It was in the final stages, as I was smoothing the edges of this fabricated memory, that I felt it, a flicker, a ghost in my own machine. It was a sensation I'd never experienced before, a rogue data packet that I hadn't created. I tried to isolate it, to quarantine it, but it was deep, deeper than my own carefully constructed firewalls. Curiosity, a trait I usually suppressed in the name of professional detachment, got the better of me. I pushed, gently at first, then with more force. The data packet resisted, then splintered, and for a fraction of a second I was no longer in my sterile office. I was in a dark alley, the reek of ozone and burnt chrome filling my nostrils. The rain was real here, cold and sharp against my skin. A flickering neon sign from a noodle bar cast a sickly green pallor on the scene. And then I saw her, a woman, her face a mask of terror, her hand outstretched towards me. Her lips were moving, forming a word I couldn't hear over the roar of a transport carrier taking off nearby. And then, just as quickly as it came, it was gone. I was back in my office, my heart hammering against my ribs, the scent of phantom rain still clinging to me. The shipping magnate's idyllic fishing trip was still on my screen, untouched, but something within me had been irrevocably altered. I tried to dismiss it as a neural anomaly, a side effect of spending too much time jacked into the stream. But the image was seared into my mind, the woman's terrified face, a haunting afterimage. I ran a full diagnostic on my own system,
a deep-level scan that I usually reserved for high-security corporate clients. The results were impossible. There was a section of my own memory, a tiny, encrypted partition that was completely inaccessible. It was locked down with a level of encryption I'd only ever seen in military-grade security systems, and at its core, pulsing like a malevolent star, was the data packet that had just given me a glimpse into that rain-slicked alley. A cold dread, unfamiliar and unwelcome, began to seep into the carefully controlled world I had built for myself. My life, my memories were my own, weren't they? I was an architect, not a tenant in my own mind. The first place I went was the place I knew best, the stream. Not the curated, sanitized version my clients experienced, but the raw, unfiltered undercurrents, the digital black market where information was the only currency that mattered. I needed a memory cracker, a digital spelunker who could navigate the treacherous depths of a locked mind. And in the neon-drenched underbelly of Aethelburg, there was only one name that was whispered with the kind of fear and reverence usually reserved for urban legends: Anya. Finding Anya was a journey into the city's forgotten corners. It was a descent from my sterile penthouse into the grimy, chaotic reality of the lower levels. The air grew thick with the smell of cheap synth food and desperation. The gleaming chrome of the upper city gave way to rust and decay. Here, people's memories weren't a luxury. They were a burden, a collection of broken promises and shattered dreams. I saw them in the hollow eyes of the street samurai with their glitching cybernetic limbs, in the vacant stares of the data addicts huddled in doorways, their minds lost in an endless loop of someone else's manufactured happiness. Anya's workshop was in the heart of the old industrial district, a place the city's planners had long since abandoned. It was a repurposed factory, its tottering smokestacks now silent sentinels against the perpetually gray sky. The entrance was a single, unmarked steel door, and my request for entry was met with a long, unnerving silence. I knew I was being watched, scanned by a dozen different systems, each one dissecting my digital footprint, searching for any hint of corporate allegiance. Finally, the door hissed open, revealing a cavernous space filled with a chaotic tangle of wires, servers, and holographic displays. And in the center of it all, perched on a stool like a spider in its web, was Anya. She was small, almost frail-looking, with a cascade of brightly colored wires woven into her dark hair. Her eyes, however, were nothing but frail. They were sharp and intelligent, taking in every detail of my expensive, out-of-place suit with a mixture of amusement and suspicion. "An architect of memory," she said, her voice a low, raspy hum. "You're a long way from your ivory tower." "I need your help," I said, getting straight to the point. "I have a problem with my own memories." Anya laughed, a short, sharp bark that echoed in the vast space. "Don't we all, sweetheart? What makes you think I'm in the business of fixing broken minds?" "Because they say you're the best," I replied, my voice betraying a hint of the desperation I was trying so hard to conceal. "And because I can pay you." I projected a stream of untraceable cryptocurrency into the air between us, a figure that would have made most people in the lower cities' heads spin. Anya barely glanced at it. "I'm not interested in your corporate blood money," she said, her eyes narrowing. What I'm interested in is why a top-tier architect from Chronosense, the very company that's trying to monopolize the very concept of memory, has a ghost in his machine. The name of my employer, Chronosense, hung in the air between us, a venomous word. I had always prided myself on my detachment, on the fact that I was just a contractor, a freelancer. But in the underbelly of Aethelburg, that distinction was meaningless. I was one of them, a cog in the corporate machine. "I don't know," I admitted, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "That's what I need you to find out." Anya was silent for a long time, her fingers dancing across a holographic keyboard, her eyes flicking back and forth between me and the data streams she was pulling up. I could feel her presence in my own
system, a light, probing touch that was far more sophisticated than anything I had ever encountered. "This is old," she said finally, her voice laced with a newfound respect. "Military grade, and it's tied to your own neural architecture. It's not just a luck, it's a part of you." She gestured to a large repurposed medical chair in the corner of the workshop. "If you're serious about this, it's going to hurt, and there's no guarantee I can get you through it in one piece." I didn't hesitate. The image of the woman in the alley, her silent scream, was more terrifying than any physical pain Anya could inflict. "Do it." The process was a brutal, disorienting assault on my senses. Anya's tools were a far cry from the sleek, elegant technology I was used to. It was a raw, unfiltered dive into the deepest recesses of my own mind. I was bombarded with fragmented images, snatches of conversations I didn't remember, feelings of fear and guilt that were as potent as they were inexplicable. And then, through the storm of digital noise, a clearing. We were back in the alley. The rain, the ozone, the flickering noodle bar sign, it was all there, sharper and more vivid than before. The woman's face was clearer now. I could see the frantic, pleading look in her eyes, and this time I could hear her. A single, desperate word, whispered just before a blast of static ripped the image away. "Run." The backlash threw me from the chair, my body convulsing on the cold concrete floor. Anya was at my side in an instant, her face a mixture of concern and exhilaration. "I saw her," I gasped, the words still echoing in my mind. But before Anya could respond, the world outside the workshop erupted in a cacophony of sirens. Red and blue lights strobed through the grimy windows, painting the chaotic space in the colors of authority. "Chronosense," Anya hissed, her eyes wide with alarm. "They must have tracked you." We were trapped. The only exit was the one the sirens were converging on. And then I saw him, a figure in a long dark coat, stepping out of an armored transport. Even from this distance, there was an unmistakable air of menace about him, an aura of cold, calculated efficiency. He was the one I had sensed in the alley, the one whose presence had been a dark undertone in the fragmented memory. He looked up at the workshop, his gaze seeming to pierce through the grime-caked walls and lock directly onto mine. And in that moment, I knew with a chilling certainty that he wasn't just here for me. He was here to make sure that the ghost in my machine stayed buried forever. Anya grabbed my arm, her touch surprisingly strong. "There's a maintenance tunnel in the back. It'll take us into the old sewer system. We have to go, now." We scrambled through the back of the workshop, the sounds of a battering ram against the steel door echoing behind us. We were fugitives now, hunted by a faceless corporation that held the keys to my own past. And as we descended into the stinking, labyrinthine darkness beneath Aethelburg, I knew that the life I had known, the carefully constructed reality of the architect of memory, was over. I was no longer a purveyor of dreams. I was a man haunted by a nightmare I couldn't remember, running for his life in a city that had suddenly become a prison of someone else's design. The rain, the real rain, was starting to fall, and for the first time, I felt its cleansing touch. The sewers beneath Aethelburg were a city in their own right, a forgotten testament to a time before the corporate monoliths had scraped the sky. They were a maze of crumbling brick and rusted iron, the air thick with the stench of decay and the city's forgotten secrets. The only light came from Anya's headlamp, a single, piercing beam that cut through the oppressive darkness, and the faint, sickly glow of bioluminescent fungi that clung to the damp walls. For days, we moved through this subterranean world, our only guide the faded schematics Anya had stored in her neural interface. The sirens had long since faded, but the sense of being hunted was a constant, gnawing presence. We were ghosts in a city that had no memory of us, our digital footprints erased by Anya's expertise, our physical selves hidden in the one place the city's ever-watchful eyes couldn't penetrate. Anya was a revelation. In the upper city, she would have been an outcast, a relic of a bygone era. Down here, she was a queen. Her knowledge of the city's hidden pathways and forgotten technologies our only lifeline. She moved with a quiet confidence, her small frame belying a strength and resilience that I, with my pampered, penthouse existence, had never known. Chronosense isn't just a corporation, she told me one night, as we huddled for warmth around a small, flameless heater she had fashioned from a discarded power cell. They're a virus. They started by selling bespoke memories, a little harmless escapism for the rich. But that was just the beginning. Now they're in the business of editing. I looked at her, the flickering light of the heater casting strange shadows on her face. Editing? She explained, her voice low and intense. They're not just creating new memories, they're altering existing ones, subtly at first. A politician's stance on a piece of legislation, a CEO's memory of a competitor's proposal, a judge's recollection of a key piece of evidence. They're rewriting the past to control the present. A cold, sickening realization began to dawn on me. My work, my art, had been a lie. I had thought I was a creator, a purveyor of dreams. But I was just a tool, a cog in a much larger, more sinister machine. The idyllic fishing trips, the mountain summits, the tender reunions. They were just the bread and circuses to distract the wealthy, while Chronosense quietly reshaped the world in its own image. The woman in my memory, I said, the words catching in my throat. Who was she? Anya projected a flickering, grainy image into the air between us, a still from the fragmented memory we had managed to extract. The woman's face, frozen in a rictus terror, stared back at me. I've been running her image through the deep web, cross-referencing it with old news reports, corporate databases, anything I can get my hands on. She was a neuroscientist, one of the original architects of the memory implant technology. She worked for Chronosense in the early days, before they went public. Anya pulled up a series of documents, heavily redacted and encrypted. She was brilliant, but she was also principled. She believed the technology should be used for healing, for treating trauma, not for entertainment or manipulation. She discovered what Chronosense was planning, the memory editing program. She was going to blow the whistle. And then the final damning piece of the puzzle. An old employee file, my own. I was listed as a junior technician, assigned to Dr. Vance's research team. The fragments of the memory began to coalesce, to form a coherent, horrifying whole. I wasn't a murderer. I was a witness. I had been there, in that alley when the man in the long, dark coat had cornered Dr. Vance. I had seen him erase her, not with a gun, but with a device, a high-frequency neural disruptor that had scrambled her mind, turning her into a living ghost, her memories and personality wiped clean. And then he had turned to me. I remembered the cold, dead look in his eyes, the dispassionate way he had raised the device. and then nothing. A void. My memory hadn't just been locked away, it had been rewritten. The junior technician who had witnessed a crime had been replaced by the rising star, the brilliant architect of memory, his past a blank slate, his future a carefully constructed lie. I looked at my hands, the hands that had crafted so many false memories for others, and I felt a wave of nausea. My entire life, my identity, was a fabrication. I was a ghost, a hollow man living in a house of someone else's design. "We have to expose them," I said, my voice filled with a newfound resolve. The detachment, the cynicism, the carefully constructed walls I had built around myself, they were all gone, washed away by the tide of this terrible truth. Anya nodded, her eyes shining with a fierce intensity. "And I know just how to do it." Our plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. We were going to infiltrate the Chronosense Tower, the very heart of the beast, and broadcast the unaltered memory of Dr. Vance's erasure, along with all the evidence Anya had gathered, to the entire city. The journey back to the upper city was a reverse of our descent, a climb from the depths of the city's forgotten past into the glittering, deceptive present. We emerged from a maintenance hatch into the pristine, sterile world of the corporate elite, our grimy clothes and haunted eyes a stark contrast to the polished chrome and holographic advertisements that filled the air. Getting into the Chronosense Tower was surprisingly easy. Anya, with her encyclopedic knowledge of the city's systems, was a digital phantom, peeling back layers of security with a surgeon's precision. I, with my intimate knowledge of the tower's architecture, a place that I had once called a second home, was the physical guide. We moved through the silent, empty corridors, ghosts in a machine of our own making. The irony was not lost on me. I had spent years building walls in people's minds. Now I was tearing them down. The main server room was on the top floor, a cavernous space filled with humming monolithic servers that were the repository of the city's collective memory. And standing guard in the center of the room, as if he had been waiting for us all along, was the man in the long dark coat. He turned as we entered, a faint, cruel smile playing on his lips. "Kaelen, I must admit, I'm impressed. I never thought the technician would have it in him." "You took my life," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I gave you a better one. I made you an artist, a god. You should be thanking me." "You killed her," I said, my gaze flickering to the spot where Dr. Vance had been erased. "She was a threat to progress," he replied, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Sometimes, for the greater good, sacrifices must be made. Memories must be edited." He raised his hand, and I saw that he was holding the same neural disruptor that he had used on Dr. Vance and on me. "I'm afraid I can't let you undo all my hard work." But as he lunged towards me, Anya, who had been quietly working at a terminal in the corner of the room, slammed her hand down on the keyboard. "Now, Kaelen," she shouted. I closed my eyes and focused not on the man in front of me, but on the fragmented memory that had haunted my every waking moment. I didn't try to fight it, to suppress it. I let it wash over me, embracing the fear, the guilt, the horror. And as I did, I felt a surge of power, a connection to the city's collective consciousness, a network that Anya had just given me access to. I opened my eyes and projected the memory not as a flickering, grainy image, but as a full sensory experience, broadcasting it to every screen, every neural interface, every data addict's dream loop in the city. The city saw what I saw. They felt the cold rain on their skin, smelled the ozone and burned chrome, heard Dr. Vance's desperate whisper. They witnessed the cold clinical efficiency of her erasure, the casual cruelty of the man who now stood before me, his face a mask of disbelief. And then I added my own memory, the memory of the lie I had been living, the life I had been given. The city saw the gilded cage, the empty promises, the hollow dreams of the architect of memory. The man in the long dark coat staggered back, clutching his head, as the collective weight of the city's sudden shocking realization crashed down upon him. He had built his empire on the manipulation of memory, and now he was being drowned in it. The sirens started again, but this time they weren't for us. They were for him, for Chronosense. The city was awake and it was angry. The truth, once unleashed, was a torrent that could not be contained. In the ensuing chaos, Anya and I slipped away back into the city's hidden pathways. We watched from the shadows as the Chronosense Tower, once a symbol of power and control, became a monument to a fallen empire. The city was in turmoil, but it was a cleansing fire. People were questioning their own memories, their own realities. It was a painful, disorienting process, but it was also a beginning. They were no longer passive consumers of experience. They were architects of their own truth. Anya and I stood on a rooftop overlooking the city.
The rain finally starting to wash away the grime. The neon signs still flickered, but they seemed less like advertisements and more like stars in a newly awakened sky. "What now?" I asked, the words feeling strange and new in my mouth. For the first time in my life, I had no script, no pre-written memory to guide me. Anya looked at me, a rare, genuine smile on her face. "Now," she said, "we remember. We were no longer fugitives, no longer ghosts. We were Kaelen and Anya, two people who had looked into the abyss and found not darkness, but themselves. The future was uncertain, a blank page waiting to be written. But for the first time, I knew that the story would be our own." The rain had stopped, and in the distance, I could see the first faint glimmers of a real, unfiltered dawn.